Greetings and welcome back to room 303 in AP English, and we turn now in our study of the great epics, just for a moment, to what we'll call the fall of Troy in this lecture. Now, I'm wanting to remind you, we have already done the work of the Iliad, Homer's Iliad, and we've given guided lectures on each one of the books. If you haven't been following our work, you want to go to learnstrong.net, down that left-hand side, and you want to go to two places right away to kind of catch up here before you engage in this study. Because this will be the study that precedes our guided study of Homer's Odyssey. As I've already said, in the AP folder, you'll find their guided lectures over all of the books of the Iliad. We just finished with book number 24. Also, down that left-hand side, you'll find Hamilton's Mythology folder, and there I'll be working specifically reviewing some of the information of lecture number 8. They're more detailed information. All right? Before we turn to the Odyssey, and again, there is an assumption when we turn to the Odyssey that the stories we are about to relate are all known by the readers, or in the original, of course, the hearers of the Odyssey, right? So we want to review these chief stories just to make sure that we understand exactly how Troy falls, because none of this is told in great detail in the Greek epics. Now we have it in Virgil's Aeneid, and we'll be spending time with that epic later. But we do have some what we call, and scholars call, lesser epics that tell these stories, especially 3 for your notes, okay? The Aethiopius are a 5-book collection that basically tells the story of Achilles' death. We'll get to these stories in more detail in a moment. We have what's often referred to as the Little Iliad, 4-book offering, where we get the suicide of Ajax or Ajax, a fight over Achilles' armor. Again, I'm going to tell these stories in more detail in a moment. We as well hear in the Little Iliad about the Trojan Horse, and invented by Odysseus, and the way in which that happens, or for the Monty Python fans in the house, the large wooden badger, right? The third of these books, and again, there's 4 of them collectively. The third of these, the Iliad, 2 books, tells of the sack of Troy, tells us about Achilles' son, sometimes referred to as Neoptolemus, sometimes referred to as Pyrrhus, who will kill Priam, the king of Troy, actually at his altar. There's a lot of bad stuff that goes on when these Greeks finally get inside the walls of Troy. It's been 10 years, and they don't handle it very gracefully. If there is a way to gracefully destroy a city, they don't handle it very gracefully. This is a classic example. Notice the irony. Achilles will let Priam live. His son will jack him at the altar. Aesthetics. We heard about this at the end of the Iliad. The predictions were made right at the end of the Iliad by, of course, Andromache herself. And Andromache will make that prediction, right? And sure enough, Aesthetics will be thrown from the walls of Troy. His mother will be carted off along with Hecuba. It's tragic how at the end all these amazing women are taken off, right? Ajax the Lesser, right? Because we have in the Iliad Ajax or Ajax the Greater, Ajax the Lesser. Ajax the Lesser, he will rape Cassandra, the daughter of Priam, in Athena's temple. Ooh, this is a major no-no. And for that, we'll be told in another text called the Nostoi, which is the returns. There's 5 books of this one. These are the voyages home. We're told Agamemnon comes home to be killed by Clytemnestra, and Aegisthus, her lover, as she's taken. You'll remember that Agamemnon killed his own daughter, Iphigenia, to make sure that he could get to the walls of Troy. We're told that Menelaus and Helen, through the help of Aphrodite, Menelaus and Helen are reunited, but they don't get a clean homecoming either. They end up down in Egypt for 8 years before they finally get home. And then Ajax the Lesser, because of the terrible thing he did to Cassandra, is drowned at sea. Well, let's review then these stories. I'm going to follow the text I just mentioned, as well as Edith Hamilton's Mythology, Chapter 14. Chapter 14 of Edith Hamilton's Mythology is a pretty decent rendering or collection of all of these stories. So if you haven't read it, I recommend you go there. For her, the sources are Virgil's Aeneid, Book 2. We'll get to that one obviously later when we do the Aeneid in detail. And Sophocles and Euripides both have plays that tell a lot of these stories. Let's go through these stories now quickly, and we're just taking some notes. First, we have Achilles' last victory. He will fight against Prince Menon, an Ethiopian, and as well during this final battle, Antilochus, Nestor's boy, dies, which is kind of tragic. The death of Achilles, predicted all the way through the Iliad, is actually kind of anticlimactic. Paris, with the help of Apollo, sees Achilles fighting at the Scaean gates, and it looks like, in fact, the Greeks are going to pull this thing off. And he shoots an arrow at him, and it pins him. It shoots him in the ankle, pins him to the ground, and he bleeds out. You'll remember that Thetis, Achilles' mother, had taken him into the underworld, the river Styx, and dipped him in. But she held him by his ankle, and she didn't re-dip him. Right now, there's always been a lot of debate about to what degree is Achilles, kind of like got a Teflon coating on him, because obviously he gets wounded. He bleeds actually in the Iliad at one point. We saw that, right? And of course he's always wearing armor. And he even says at one point, I can't go out without armor, I will get hurt. So this is the way, ironically, irony of all ironies, that Paris will be able to, kind of defend Troy, right, and all of that. After Achilles is dead, the major story is actually not his funeral. The major story is what happens with his armor. And the men, the Greek troops, they have a secret vote, and the armor doesn't go to Ajax, the greatest of the warriors, but to Odysseus, the greatest mind. By the way, this is going to factor in some ways in our study of the Odyssey. And before we get there, and this is what makes this even more compelling, two more stories. Ajax and Odysseus have to save the corpse of Achilles, much like the corpse of Patroclus. There's actually a fight over the corpse, right? And ultimately, after Achilles' corpse is brought back, the funeral, the only thing of importance here is that his ashes are placed in the same urn with Patroclus. We forecasted this in our study of the Iliad, didn't we, right? So that their ashes commingle. Now, this thing about Achilles' arms is a big dog deal. Ajax and Odysseus both vie for them. The secret vote gives it to Odysseus. Ajax is really upset about this because he's been disgraced. We go back to the Iliad and the whole notion of Time, honor, Scooby snacks, and Kleos, glory. And both of them, for Ajax, he feels like both of them have not been properly given to him. And we're told that Athena gets involved. She drives Ajax with madness. He decides that he is going to kill Agamemnon, Menelaus, and Odysseus, and he goes out and he just starts killing as many of the Greek troops as he can. The problem is that Athena has blinded him, and he's actually killing sheep. By the hundreds, he's just slaughtering sheep. At the end, he will grab this large ram, thinking that it's Odysseus, beats him to death all night long. In the morning, when he recognizes what he's done, full shame now, he kills himself, commits suicide by falling on his sword. The Greeks, by the way, won't give him a proper burial because he committed suicide. This will be one of the distinctions between the way the Greeks and the Romans think about suicide. For the Greeks, suicide is a bad ordeal all the way around. For the Romans, it's an acceptable form of exit. And so all they do is bury Ajax. They do not burn his body. They only bury him. Okay. The Greeks are at a quandary after the death of Achilles, and they're actually ready to give up. They go to Calchas, and Calchas will in fact tell them there is in fact one person, a Trojan named Helenus, who knows the future. And if you go to him and capture him, he'll give you information. So Odysseus captures him, brings him back. Helenus says, here's the deal. That famous bow and arrow set of Hercules, you gotta have that. Well, Hercules on his funeral pyre was taken care of by Philoctetes, and for that, the offering, the gift that was given to him was in fact the bow and arrows of Hercules. The only problem is that Philoctetes was on his way to Troy, got bit by a snake on an island called Lemnos, and was left there to die because he was too sick. Well, obviously Odysseus realizes when he hears this, we got problems because we got to go back to Lemnos and we got to go, hopefully the Philoctetes is still there and we can get the bows and arrows. In some versions of the story, by the way, Diomedes, the great warrior pal of Odysseus, and Neoptolemus, that is to say Pyrrhus, the other name for Achilles' son, also goes along in some versions of the story. Well, first they steal the bow and arrows, then they decide, you know what, it's a pathetic thing to leave Philoctetes there, let's persuade him to go. At first Philoctetes doesn't want to, ultimately he goes. Back at Troy, Philoctetes gets healed by the healer there, and the very first person who he wounds is Paris, right? But Paris doesn't die. Instead he says, I want to be carried back to my old girl, my girlfriend, my lover, Odyssey. Now, Odyssey is the one that he was with before Athena and Hera and Aphrodite joined him for the famous judgment of Paris. And Paris says, if you can just get me back to Odyssey, I know I can get healed. And he goes back and he begs Odyssey, will you please cure me? Because she's a singer. Will you please cure me? Or she's a beautiful nymph. And she says, no, you left me high and dry, ran off after Helen. No, I got no interest in it. Paris dies, and Odyssey then will commit suicide because she's so sad, and it's a tragic story, right? Still, though, with the death of Paris, Troy won't fall, right? Odysseus and Diomedes, they figure they have a way maybe to get a little advantage. They steal into Troy, into Athena's temple, and they steal the Paladini, which is the image of Athena out of Troy, right? And once they've done this, they're convinced of two things. One, they're convinced they're going to win. Two, they've been fighting outside the walls of Troy for 10 years and they cannot breach these walls. They're going to have to get inside the walls of Troy. This will, of course, lead us to the most famous story of all of the stories. It's today, of course, referred to as the Trojan Horse because the horse is the horse that defeats Troy, or as we've said, the Monty Python Holy Grail lines, the large wooden badger, right? Well, what's up with this horse? Well, they're gonna cheat. I mean, let's just say it out loud. The way that the Greeks defeat Troy is through cheating. A point made very clear, by the way, by the Roman poet Virgil in the Iliad. How do they cheat? Well, first of all, they pretend as if they're all going home. And they're going to spread this lie through especially Sinon. They're going to spread this lie that says that after they stole Athena from Troy, Athena was mad, and so they decided they would go home. However, before they went home, they left a sacrifice to Athena, and it was this large horse. Inside a cavity where a few warriors can go. No warriors want to go in, with the exception of Achilles' son Neoptolemus, who's all kind of rear and ready to get inside that pony, along with obviously Odysseus himself, right? They leave behind, what they do is they sail away and they go behind an island and they wait for cover of night. They leave behind a liar, Sinon, who will tell this invented story that he was in fact supposed to be the sacrifice. The argument was there was a sacrifice of Agamemnon's daughter Iphigenia. Before they came, there had to be a sacrifice for them to get home. That sacrifice was for the gods, for the goddess Athena, and so Sinon was to be the sacrifice. However, he lies and says, "I escaped and I got away. They sailed away, and now I'm back." The Greeks hope, right, that you destroy this huge horse. Why is it so big? So that the Trojans won't be able to get it inside of the city. We're in fact told that they tear down parts of their wall to try and get this horse inside of the city. The Greeks hope, Sinon will lie, that you destroy the horse because it's a gift to Athena, and she will obviously, curse Troy if it's sitting outside. Obviously, if you can get it inside of the walls of Troy, the suggestion is Athena is then on your side. This is, of course, one of those really nasty, nasty lies. And the Trojans buy it except for two. Okay, the first is Cassandra, who is, of course, blessed with telling the truth and cursed with no one ever believing her. And she says, "You guys, this is terrible, terrible." They don't listen to her. The other one is the priest, Lycaon, and he and his two sons, they are very skeptical of this. They say, don't trust Greeks bearing gifts. Well, Poseidon has seen enough. He sends two serpents up. They strangle and crush Lycaon and his two boys, and then they slither into the temple of Athena. That's all the Trojans need to believe. This is a good luck thing for us with this horse. Let's push it into the city, and let's begin to party because the war is over. Well, the final part of our story is the brutal part of our story. What they couldn't accomplish, the Greeks, what they couldn't accomplish outside the walls of Troy. All of the lives sacrificed, as we read about in the Iliad. All of the terrible things done on both sides, all for nothing. But once those Greeks get inside the city, brutal. However, we're told the Trojans fight very, very desperately to try and save their city. For example, we're told they dress up like the Greeks. They take off their Trojan weaponry, and they put on the Greek weaponry. When they see Greeks who have been killed, they put on the Greek armor so they can get close to more Greeks, and then they kill, right? They tear up their roofs, and they throw stuff down onto the Greeks. A huge tower of Priam's castle is toppled over on top of a whole bunch of Greeks and crushed them. But in the end, they can't stop it. Greeks, Achilles' son, Neoptolemus or Pyrrhus, will kill, as we said, Priam right in front of his altar, right? Again, the irony is that Achilles will let the old man live. It's almost, though, to go back to that passage in Iliad 24. It's tragic because it's almost as if both Achilles and Priam know not only that the walls of Troy that the city of Troy is going to come down, but Priam isn't going to make it out alive. Aphrodite's son Aeneas is the only one that legitimately escapes with a small group of people. That will be the story of the Aeneid by Virgil. We'll get to it later. Aphrodite, by the way, is the only goddess that really helps the Trojans, and in the process, she will, in fact, escort Helen to Menelaus. Menelaus and Helen will sail. It takes them 8 years down into Egypt they go before they finally get home to Sparta. Now, of course, Helen and Menelaus will play a role in the Odyssey, so we want to put that in our notes. They will be there by the point that the young son Telemachus, the young son of Odysseus, shows up. The final stories are all brutal stories, right? The women of Troy are all led away in shame. Hecuba and Andromache as well. But before Andromache leaves Troy, she watches her young baby Astyanax taken to the top of the walls of Troy and his little body thrown off. In some versions of the story, it's Neoptolemus, or the son of Achilles. In other versions of the story, it's Odysseus who does this. Either way, it's brutal, right? It's brutal. Hecuba's daughter, Polyxena, is in fact killed, sacrificed at Achilles' grave, right at the end of this whole project, right, as honor. Aias, we've already said, will rape Cassandra in the temple of Athena, and for that, he will, of course, be drowned. He's got to be payback for that. Finally, the irony of all ironies is that Cassandra, after she's raped, is then forced into the ship, into the boat with Agamemnon, and home she goes. All the way home, she tells Agamemnon, "You're going home. You will get jacked. I will get jacked. Beware of Clytemnestra." Agamemnon's not believing any of it. When he shows up, Clytemnestra has a plan. She and her lover, Aegisthus, will in fact plot to make sure that Agamemnon has his homecoming. The homecoming is brutal. They kill him. And of course, that's the story as well of how, in the end, Clytemnestra and Aegisthus both will have their comeuppance as well. And of course, that's the famous story of the son of Agamemnon, right, who will get his vengeance along with the daughter Electra, right. So we've got all kinds of stories going on at the end, and all of those stories I've lectured on in the Harvard Classics lectures and the Oresteia trilogy. You can go and watch those lectures if you want to, with Orestes and his vengeance, as well as, of course, in Edith Hamilton's mythology. Well, there are the stories that bridge from the end of the Iliad to the beginning now of the Odyssey. We now turn to a set of introductory comments on the Odyssey, as I did with the Iliad. We'll give you that. And then we're going to go to each book of the Odyssey, and we'll continue to play our same game and study. As we did with the Iliad, we'll continue to play our same game and study with the Odyssey. I hope that you'll pick up the Odyssey and begin the reading of the Odyssey on your own. We'll again be working with the Fagel's translation as well. I think it's a very, very good one for our study. Well, all right. I hope you'll come back. I hope you're having as much fun doing this work with me as I am with you. Thank you.